Hey, good morning, everyone. I keep saying that. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to wait a few seconds for people to join this webinar. But if you want to get ahead of the curve, as ever, you can post your comments in the chat and also your questions before we get started. Loads and loads and loads to get through. I'm thankfully aided and abetted with Adrian, Kate, and Helen in residence on this webinar to address your questions. We decided to, if we have loads and loads of questions, because we had many registrations for this webinar, to take those offline afterwards. So if we don't get around to your questions, it's not because we're ignoring you, it's because we're going to take that offline and probably address that, or definitely address that there afterwards. There. So as ever, we will give you a copy of the slides. We will also give you a recording of this webinar. And always, please do participate in our polls because that gives you feedback of what your peers are up to. Also gives you an opportunity to course correct this webinar to suit your objectives as well. Also, I should say shout out to the fact that, there's an opportunity to reach out to our partners at Avyse Partners here, who've got loads and loads of resources, templates, and great stuff on their website. So you can download and cut out and keep those templates as well, and also sign up to their blogs and also their offerings on their website as alongside us. So let's get going, and we will welcome people as and when they get in. So yes, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this joint EDF and Avyse webinar on FCA enforcement is changing. How ready is your firm? And I know that we're one day out from Black Friday, that magical moment in the diaries of everybody, and the whole country goes mad trying to save 20 quid on an air fryer. And if that's you and you're taking time out of your diary, we're genuinely very pleased that you've decided to press pause on that and that you've clearly prioritized avoiding FCA enforcement action over kitchen appliance discounts. So we respect that, and we just want to fist pump you out and say, well done, you guys there. So I don't think that will be in the recording, by the way. I think that might be edited out, some of this. So as I said to you, please submit your questions and your comments on this webinar as we go along, and also participate in our live chat as well, and also respond to the poll questions. And yes, recordings and a copy of the slides are available, as well as an opportunity to sign up for our thought leadership there. I am greatly delighted to welcome Kate Robinson, Principal at Avyse Partners, alongside her colleague Helen Murphy, also a Principal at Avyse Partners, and our erstwhile chairman and co-founder of Elephants, don't forget Adrian Harvey here, and who are going to be discussing 4 of these points, and also the points that you have raised as individuals going through this webinar. Look, there's a lot to cover off, and I want to probably land in, if I can frame this conversation that we're going to have over the next 58 minutes, and as such, we're going to land 3 points, 3 C's: culture, obviously, competence and controls, and the evidence of which will be supercharging your ability to respond and react proactively to the FCA's expectations there. You can read the discussion points there on the slides, so we won't need to go into further details. But let's start this discussion off with a poll question, if I may there. Let's launch the poll here. There. And you'll see on your screen the following question: how confident are you that your firm could provide, and I think Adrian picked up on this as well, creditable evidence of its controls effectiveness if challenged by the FCA tomorrow? So how confident are you that your firm could provide credible evidence of its controlled effectiveness if challenged by the FCA tomorrow? So welcome, Adrian, welcome, Kate, welcome, Helen, to this webinar. And I just want to come to you, first of all, sorry, Helen, on this and that. Are firms confident in their controls? And if so, do they overestimate perhaps their controls effectiveness?
I think firms are often confident in their controls. Sometimes, though, they overestimate how well those controls actually operate in the first line, especially when it comes to evidencing. So we often see firms who kind of assume that because a control exists, it must be working, but when they're asked for evidence of the operational reality, they can't provide it to us. So I would say often control design is really strong, but the operation and record keeping tends to be overestimated somewhat when we go in and start testing.
Mm. And sometimes underneath the weak controls, Adrian, lies another challenge, which is competence and confidence there. I was looking at this, 2021, 45% of final notices that the FCA issued to firms identified deficiencies in competence and also training. And that's the hidden challenge that many firms face, don't they? It's not only the controls, but it's underlying competence and confidence of individuals within the organization.
I think this just plays really well into what Helen said. I think firms put a lot of effort into putting all the controls and the structures in place. It's fantastic. And when you look at it at a desk without a single shot being fired, it looks perfect. And then, of course, the customer phones up and speaks to one member of your staff. And that's where perhaps the controls aren't uniformly and precisely executed. So, yes, competence is a critical fail point in this respect. And I would have thought most of the firms on this webinar couldn't quantify employee competence. So in terms of controls and that, I'm completely confident. Anyway, moving on.
Kate, 57% of the audience say they're fairly confident and that they have some evidence, but gaps remain. Is that what you see when you go into firms with your consumer duty assessment hat on?
Yeah, I think I'm always a little nervous when firms say they're super confident in their control framework. But I think most firms, when it comes to like identification of risks, most firms match a risk with a control. Where we see the nuances and the difference between like the quality of that control, how well it's designed, and ultimately whether that kind of governance and culture framework that supports the effective reporting is in place, because it's usually one or the other that falls out of bed for one reason or another, particularly with consumer duty.
And 3%, thank you for your honesty and thank you for sharing. Is our 3%, and Helen said, not confident, and we'd struggle to evidence control effectiveness. Do you think that's a fair percentage, or do you see that a little bit more prevalent than you would like to see?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say in my experience, 3%, and we probably see when we go into firms that more than 3% are not competent. I guess having said that, we do go into firms to do skilled person reviews quite often, and so perhaps we're seeing firms at that end of the spectrum anyway, where the FCA has already identified significant issues.
And I think that let's get down to specifics here, and certainly where we see a real challenge is in enforcement risk. So what we've invited you to do is to please rank the areas that present perhaps to your firm, and in particular, the greatest enforcement risk to your firm this year and next. So please rank. You've got a number of options available to you, from financial crime, SMCR, culture and conduct there. If there isn't one there and you think others, please specify, please post that in the chat there. Before we see the poll results, Adrian, which risks do you think firms think they're good at, but the evidence would suggest that there's room for improvement? And I'm putting it nicely.
I'm going to do that thing that I do on some of the webinars and start strong. The thing that I've never really heard a firm say to me is, the biggest risk we've got is our culture. But according to the FCA, that's the biggest risk. So now I hear lots of compliance professionals say some of the stuff we do around here, tone from the top is one of the phrases that comes out, isn't perhaps where we like it. So I'm just going to call it out and say, culture. And funny enough, that's presenting as one of the lowest.
Kate, where are firms quietly vulnerable then?
I think Adrian's right to a certain extent that when you look at particular areas of compliance, the root cause of a problem is often grounded in culture and governance, be that governance in its broadest form. I think data governance is a real issue for firms right now. Where does that present itself in a way that the FCA starts looking at a firm in terms of investigations? I think that conduct area is one of those key areas that we see at the moment. So, and that might be because FCA have received information about firm high complaints volumes, numbers of reports, etc., that they then investigate, and that broader kind of root cause all comes down to that kind of culture and accountability piece in my mind.
Helen, you're going to be busy. Look at that. If you look at the financial crime systems and controls, firms believe that's the highest risk that they face, or enforcement risk they should face there. I think if I'm reading it, second is consumer duty outcomes and data evidence, going back to what Kate is saying there. Firms perceive that they've not cracked the culture question, but they're getting there. Is that fair? Are those results honest?
I mean, the FCA is definitely focused on financial crime at the moment. That's where the biggest amount of Section 166 reviews are coming. So I think that is probably fair. But certainly, there's a lot of activity in that space from the regulator, both in terms of requirement notices and things, but also MAP exercises, Section 165 requests, and so on. So I think that is fair.
Kate, firms still struggling to embed consumer duty, make it part of their culture, their DNA?
I think some firms are. I've seen a lot of great stuff with consumer duty, and I've seen some firms demonstrate some really brilliant demonstrable change for customer outcomes. I think firms are now getting used to maybe around that expectation piece, what good looks like is still a struggle, because we've still got quite broad brush principle rules that at an individual firm level, it's sometimes difficult to understand what good looks like from the FCA's perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we look at this, Helen, I mean, I want to move the audience towards the right-hand side of the screen there, and Teresa Chambers' speech, work with us or against us. I think that's pretty punchy, isn't it? In terms of like what a regulator comes up with. What does this tell us about where the FCA wants firms to, or how firms to behave now and in the future?
I mean, I think what it's saying is that the FCA wants firms to be proactive. They want them to be transparent if something goes wrong. They want them to challenge themselves. What they don't want to do is be chasing firms for problems. They want to come early with a solution. So I think basically what they're saying is if you act like a partner, then supervision is going to feel like a collaborative effort. But if you wait to be pushed, then it's going to feel punitive.
Adrian, she didn't say it, but I'm just making up words here and adding to Teresa's words here. Points mean prizes there for those firms who, as Helen said, get ahead of regulatory expectations. Not I'm suggesting that there's a link between game show hosts and FCA enforcement action.
Tell it's getting towards Christmas with you.
Yeah.
I think, for me, echoing the earlier point, this is about getting on the front foot. Yeah, and we were talking earlier about spirit and letter of the law. And for me, getting on the front foot is about adopting the spirit of the legislation and embedding it in your organisation, rather than, dare I say, ticking boxes and saying that's what the law says. We've done it. Here's the evidence, and all the poor practices are still operating underneath. So for me, it's front foot. It's proactive. And maybe, dare I say, a little bit more honesty in firms. Look in the mirror. Are we abiding by the spirit and the letter of the law, or just the letter because we can get away with it?
Kate, what's driving this sharper tone, this sharper focus from the FCA then?
I think it's really interesting. I think ultimately 2025 has been a year where FCA have announced their 5-year strategy. They are seriously pushing the growth agenda in terms of wanting to help and support firms. They have a clear message from Treasury as regards achieving that objective. I think that doesn't mean that firms will always do the best and the right things by customers and markets. And as a result, FCA are in this really interesting position where previously their go-to would be kind of to question, to ask, to be a little bit more direct with firms. But they've kind of turned the table and said, okay, firms, this is on you now. We want you to grow, but we also want you to tell us where you see your risks. Let us know. The onus is on you as a firm rather than then coming in and looking. In my mind, having been in this job for a long time, I feel like we're in a bit of a quiet storm period because there are moments where the regulator are super focused on particular areas and firms feel the heat. We're in that kind of quieter period in my mind at the moment, but where they spot something and there hasn't been firm engagement, they are not slow to respond right now. They are really asking some pretty searching and difficult questions when they spot something that they are not happy about.
And building on that, Helen, rapid investigations, financial crime fines, control failures. What's the FCA really telling us when the rubber hits the road and they basically put their foot on the accelerator?
Well, they're telling us, I think there's different gaps at different firms, to be honest. But one thing that we're definitely seeing is that firms are getting a lot of requests for information at the moment. Sometimes firms don't respond very well to those requests for information, and that can really lead to problems. I don't know if everyone knows what a Section 165 request is. We get quite a few queries about that. If you Google it, I did write an article on it a few months ago, and we're sort of near the top of the Google search. But what happens is that the FCA issues a Section 165 request when they already have some concerns, and some firms maybe think they're compliant, but their response to the Section 165 shows otherwise, and that's where weaknesses start to show up.
And then when we look at the pace, I mean, Kate picked up on this just previously, and there 5 investigations resolved in 16 months there. That's a real warning to many firms that that the FCA will be proactive and actually want to look at resolution of these investigations rather fast in comparison to what it was 1, 2, or 3 years ago there. How do firms react and respond in that way? Yes, being proactive when they get an inquiry, but they can be proactive in that, can't they? Before that letter or that information request has actually been made.
Yeah, I mean, they should obviously be looking at their controls, at their risk assessments, and making sure that the risks in their risk assessment actually tie up to what's happening in practice. I think one of the problems is that by the time you do get, the FCA say they're coming to visit, or you get a Section 165 request or another request for information, it's a bit late really to do anything about it. You don't get a long time to respond, maybe a week, maybe 10 days. And so if your procedures and controls are not in order, then it's too late at that point. And I guess the other thing we see is that firms sometimes respond to requests for information too quickly. They don't really think through the reasons why the FCA is asking those questions. We've seen that a few times. Last year we did 4 Section 166s, which had all stemmed from 165s, and I think at least a couple of those could have been avoided had the firm sort of taken stock and thought about how to respond before they just fired off a response to the FCA.
And it's not just financial crime challenges or weaknesses, Kate, that get firms into deep water there, but with your consumer duty hat on there, where are the vulnerabilities, where are the weaknesses that the FCA is picking up on?
Yeah, I think one of those key areas that is a focus at the moment is the fair value assessments, because they underpin and are the linchpin for all other elements as well. So if we think about it from the perspective of, if you look at the insurance industry, to demonstrate fair value, you've got to be able to respond at pace and fairly to a customer's claim. Now, if your claims management numbers are, you've got low response rates, slow response rates, there is automatically a feedback as to whether you are delivering fair value in your initial pricing of policy. And the same cycle appears across all other industries and sectors. And I think a lot of firms have got it right in the first instance in terms of writing down what good looks like to them for fair value. But I think firms have become a little complacent and said, oh, yeah, we've got fair value assessments. We need to make sure that that fair value assessment is driving and linked to the risk appetite as the firm kind of changes, and you go back to it. And look, do we still agree with this? Is there anything that's happened in the last 6 months that would suggest that we're not offering fair value, and what do we do about it?
Adrian, what I see over organisations is a patchwork of inconsistent competence when it comes down to consumer duty there. Is that what you're seeing as well? And how can firms rectify or reconcile that?
Okay, I mean, we've got a lot to cover today. So the first point is most firms don't credibly measure the competence of their employees. So if you're not measuring it, it is pretty hard target to hit, right? The second point is we know from our own activities, almost 200 million interventions, that the competence levels are the average competence levels using firms' own yardsticks is 54%. So, and that's distributed randomly almost across the workforce.
So if that's 54%, then are you going to get unpredictable customer outcomes as a result of that then?
Well, let's go back to the insurance point that Kate made. You know, I have a claim. I speak to Tarquin. He's super competent. I've got to believe that my outcome's going to be better than when I speak to Philip, who's not. No offense.
Don't worry, I get that feedback at home. Yeah,
I mean, it's just not measured, and we'll come on to it. We'll come on to it because I think you know, this is one of these points about spirit and letter of the law, and my hobby horse about ticking boxes, and Helen's point about how you respond to a 165. I think I would feel extremely nervous. I've run some very big regulated firms in different markets. I would feel extremely nervous offering up my employee training and competency records to the regulator. Say, look, this proves that everyone knows what they're doing. Yeah, everyone got 100%. And they got 100% the year before. They got 100% the year before that. It doesn't. It's a ticking a box. It's not the spirit. And I think if firms are doing it genuinely, then that provides an evidence base that I think, to Helen's point, could stop that 165 in its tracks.
Yeah.
So if you think it through, if you get on the front foot and say, we're not just ticking the box, we're going to do this properly. So when we do get a 165, we say, hang on a minute. You know, I can think of plenty of our customers who are doing 1 million individual interventions to prove this point every quarter. Think of that situation when one of those insurance companies goes to the regulator and says, well, there's 1 million interventions last quarter about the competence of our employees in respect of claims. It's a pretty powerful place to be versus here's a tick box from last year's refresher training.
Yeah. And that demonstrates culture in itself, doesn't it?
For me, it's a smoking gun, and I think Kate picked it up with conduct and culture. And I do think the regulators in this sort of pause place, or not slightly sleepier place, but I think it's calm before the storm, to be honest.
Helen, that evidence, request for evidence can be exemplified, obviously, when we look at the failure to prevent fraud, which landed obviously on most people's desks on the 1st of September. I was struck by Nick F. Graves, SFO director's quote. He said, I'm very keen to prosecute somebody for that offence. And that was made in April 2025. So if nothing else, he's on the front foot. At the SFO there. The demand for evidence, whether it be financial crime, competency, and SMCR, consumer duty, is expected and mandated, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And we're definitely seeing firms that are still not compliant with failure to prevent fraud that have realised that the 1st of September is now quite a while ago and that they still haven't really done anything to evidence it. So I guess just on the failure to prevent fraud example, you've got to make sure you've got to show that you've taken those reasonable steps. So you've got to have your fraud risk assessment in place. You've got to have policies and procedures covering fraud. You've got to have training records. This is, something close to Adrian's heart, but training records are absolutely key to show that staff have been trained and that they have been informed. You've got to show how you are monitoring your failure to prevent fraud risk, and then you've got to keep records of any investigations that you've undertaken. And if you can do all of those things, then you're definitely in a strong position. But I do think on this one, there's still lots and lots of firms that have not thought about it as much as they should have done and are leaving themselves open to enforcement action.
Mm. And many firms, Kate, say that their culture's improving, but want the evidence, not the sentiment. Where do you see the biggest gap between cultural claims and the evidence that firms can actually produce?
Yeah, I think it's tricky. I think those firms that are doing well have really thought through, like, what's our purpose here? What are the values, the behaviors that we want to see? And how can we really measure those on a day-to-day real life basis, which isn't an easy thing to do. You need to have that kind of culture framework in place so that you can really demonstrate, it might be like staff retention, it might be staff awards programs, incentives, etc., that can really push you towards demonstrating the culture that you want to have. And the majority of firms, and it's okay, I think, as well, from the regulator's perspective, for you to say, this is what I want my culture to look like. But do you know what? We're not there yet. And I'm working on it. And to be, everything doesn't have to be lived in. It can be aspirational. As long as you can demonstrate you've got a pathway to get to where you want.
And that pathway has got to be married and wedded to the fact that, and it's my words, by the way, I like this slide because I came up with the title, supervision by algorithms. That's definitely the idea that the FCA is triangulating reg data, complaints, and customer sentiment. This is not 2028, this is 2025, 2026, where we're seeing the triangulation of that MI gathered by the regulator. Is there a danger that perhaps the regulator, Kate, knows more about your business than you do?
I don't know whether the regulator will know more about their businesses than you do, but I think what the regulator is very good at, their data grab has been enormous. They know more about firms than, sometimes firms know themselves. But ultimately, I think there's two areas of focus here for firms. One, have you looked at the data that is available that the FCA have, and have you analysed it to work out where emerging risks might be and where there might be an outlier? And two, and I think this is the bit that often trips up firms, data governance. How confident are you when you report on, let it be your volume of complaints or your volume of lending activity or insurance deals, that it is correct? Because the number of times I go in and speak to firms, and when we drill down on that data, the numbers change, and quite often for the better of the firm. You need to think to yourselves, what's my confidence level in the data that I'm presenting to the regulator? Because they are costly mistakes, particularly if FCA have taken that data, created a baseline of what they think good looks like. And if you're falling below it, you will start getting some pretty serious questions. And you don't want to be asked those questions just because the confidence level in the data was not where you want it to be.
Adrian, I'll throw this out to you, and I fully agree with what you're saying, and Kate there. Does competency become the hidden differentiator then between what a firm that's looking safe and proactive and understanding that as a culture indicator, or a firm that perhaps looks slightly tenuous and risky in terms of like how they understand their culture, let alone measure their culture?
Yes, but I think it's a massively overlooked KPI. It's historically, it's been very, very difficult to measure competence. My favorite line is, firms know more about their multifunctional devices capability than they do their front. My knowledge, multifunctional devices aren't covered by the Act. So, that would seem to be a massive oversight, but it's coming. It's undeniably coming, because firms that have that capability can map the customer journey and good outcomes to competence. So training, by the way, and training results are not a proxy for competent employees. They are not a proxy for competent employees. And employers aren't really interested in people with perfect scores. They're interested in competent employees. And what the regulator needs is firms with competent employees who deliver great customer outcomes when the rubber hits the road, and the framework, is in the drawer, or the governance thing is written down in someone else's office. So for me, competence is a critical success factor. It will come up more and more. The regulator is very attuned to it, and you should all be conscious of this KPI that is latent in your organization called competence.
Are we seeing better and higher quality data and consistency of good quality data, Helen, when it comes down to financial crime issues and challenges there? Is that better than it was 12 months ago? And do you see that moving in the right direction for 2026 and beyond that firms are producing?
I don't really see that. I mean, particularly in the rep crim, for example, we've seen firms really struggle to be able to gather the data that they need to report on their rep crim. It just seems like such a difficult thing to do, even for a small firm. I mean, it's kind of understandable in large institutions, but even in small institutions, it seems to be nigh on impossible. And we've definitely seen a couple of cases where firms have submitted their rep crim without really looking at what they submitted the year before, and some of the information has changed. For example, there's a lot more high risk customers than there was the year before, and then that will generate questions from the FCA. So that data is what the FCA are using to start a lot of its sort of data gathering and question asking. And I'm not really seeing that get easier for firms, and it's baffling in some ways, but it just seems to be a constant challenge.
On that happy note,
Sorry.
What can firms do about it, and what do they expect from your MI, Kate? Consumer duty hat on here, there. Forward-looking, evidence-ready, outcome-linked. What's causing perhaps the gaps in firms really getting a handle of this?
I mean, all of those are absolutely key, and it's great that they're on the slide. I think, and you can't almost have one without the other at the moment. That said, I think where the gaps are is just linking it to that overall principle of consumer duty is to avoid foreseeable harm. So forward-looking element is really, really important. And it's those emerging risks that firms sometimes miss. Similarly, I think one of the key areas of focus is around just really kind of drilling down what MI you're reporting. So firms, for example, now have got all excited about vulnerable customers, and they're reporting on the number of vulnerable customers across different stages of a journey, etc. But it's then asking yourself, okay, so we've got this many vulnerable customers, but what does that mean? That next level of questioning, is that right? Is it wrong? Are they getting the same outcomes as non-vulnerable? Are we doing the right thing by those in terms of those other elements of consumer duty cross-cutting principles?
And you can get ahead of this, can't you, Adrian? Like Kate's saying, by asking yourself a better question, but also actually getting ahead with better MI, forward-looking MI there. Are you seeing a shift in firms deciding that, hang on a second, rearview mirror MI is not really where we should be at? There is a better way of actually presenting data and grabbing data.
I hear a lot of chat about data, right? So I ran a very big energy business, and we have more data than you could shake a stick at. And we had almost all management information, right? So, you can become completely overloaded with data. And I think the trick, the skill, the craft is to make sure that data's refined so that you can draw accurate, credible conclusions from it, management information. And one of the things that we often get drawn into conversations with prospective customers and customers is data that is lag data and data that is lead indicator. So lag indicating data is already happened, the detriment has occurred. And if you're relying on just lag indicator, the damage or harm you do to customers to refine your business, is not a great model. So you should be looking for lead indicator data to augment your existing management information. That I agree and accept is hard, but just because it's hard isn't a valid excuse not to do it. A bit like going to the gym.
In 2026, it can't be in the too difficult bucket there. And Helen, and when we look at actually and give us some opportunities and some sweet melodic news here that will help the audience enhance their controls. What needs to happen for them to align their controls with what the FCA wants and needs?
So my focus is on financial crime, but say from a financial crime point of view, it's about linking your firm-wide risk assessment to your MI. So lots of firms have plenty of MI, but lots of it doesn't actually prove whether the financial crime risks they've identified are being mitigated. So if you can align your MI to the risks in your BWA, you can immediately show the FCA that your controls are risk-based and monitored and whether they're effective or not. But we often see risk assessments that are kind of a tick box once a year exercise and then put on the shelf and not actually linked to any sort of management information or governance.
And Kate, and from I want to pick up on what you said about fair value. How can they supercharge their approach to fair value assessments in 2026?
Yeah, I think to link to that control framework, there's a lot of great discussions happening at firms, but if they're not written down, according to the regulator, it didn't happen. So that is my overarching piece, because firms do so much brilliant work, but they don't evidence it. And it's a really simple thing to change. I think also when it comes to fair value, make sure you have got clear ownership of those different strands and who is accountable for what within that. I go and sit with firms and I will interview 12 people from a board, and I'll ask them all exactly the same question, who's responsible for making the final decision as price or something. I can get 12 different answers. So ownership and evidence to me are real critical pathways to getting it right moving forward.
And Adrian, a control is only as strong as the behavior underneath it, and the data, especially on your people, doesn't lie, does it?
No, you asked that in a way that expects a particular answer, and I'm not entirely sure what I'm supposed to say. So, yeah. So clearly, we're back to the data point, aren't we? And to what extent can firms accurately pinpoint where people weaknesses exist? And if you think, let's go back to those training and competency records that firms diligently collect every year. Really, forget about the tick box. Oh, I can show a regulator something. How much value is that set of data to your organization in ensuring customers get good outcomes?
Crystal clear.
Zero.
I think that when we look at moving, and I mean you touched upon it before, Adrian and Helen, moving from manual to what we call intelligent data, and I guess forward-looking data can be overlapped with the same phrase as intelligent data there. Where does it fail first in your world of financial crime, and how do firms remediate that fast and effectively?
So I guess the FCA would say they see the same weaknesses across financial crime controls across the industry. As Adrian already said, MI is often lagging, so it's produced too late to actually influence any decisions. And ownership of data is often really fragmented, so there's no single source of the truth. And there's a lot of vanity MI, which looks polished but doesn't actually tell you anything about your risks or your control effectiveness. And the other thing we often see, particularly when we're doing skilled person work, is sort of weak evidence of escalation. So there's lots of MI that's shared, but it's not really challenged. I would say that when we sort of review board minutes, there's hardly any evidence of challenge, and often not very good capturing of decision making either. And when the FCA comes in and they start testing your controls, those things are going to show up immediately. So I think, as we've talked about, sort of leading firms are moving towards intelligent MI, so AI-driven detection and real-time dashboards and evidence-based assurance that your controls are actually working in practice. And from a financial crime perspective, that means spotting suspicious patterns before you've breached a threshold, or getting an alert early so that you can prevent something from occurring before it gets too big.
What's the one upgrade that you both say, Adrian and Kate? Adrian, you first, that firms can actually adopt to move from manual to intelligent MI?
I actually think Helen does a really good job there. For me, this is a mindset shift in the organization. That's what it is. It's a mindset shift, and it's like the board minutes. And the answer is the C-suite needs to be more demanding of watermelon management information. By the way, it's all green on the outside, open it up, it's all red in the middle. Yeah, but they need to be much more demanding. And for that to happen, they need to change that. It's a mindset shift. They've got to look at it from a genuine risk perspective. It's not about ticking boxes. It's about the spirit of the legislation.
I think that what I'd add to that as well is that there is a personal level of responsibility as an SMF. And one of the reasonable steps FCA expect you to take is for you to question and challenge the information provided to you, MI, and question whether it is fit for purpose. Is it what you need? The number of board packs I look at that are pages long, it's confusing to know what the key risks are and what the key messages are.
Goodness me. Well, if that's the case, then this slide here will depict what it should be like, Helen, which is a data telling a story to the FCA, which is positive, proactive, but also reflective as well on where things have gone wrong, but where firms have remediated what's gone wrong proactively before intervention is needed or required.
So I think in financial crime, and probably in compliance as well, to be fair, a convincing story connects all the dots. So it doesn't just say alerts are up 12% and leave it there. What it does is it explains why. So there's been a new product or a shift in customer behaviour, and then it says what action you need to take to close down those alerts. So I think data leads you to clear risk insights and decisions and a measurable impact, and that's what the FCA is looking for.
The data story is critical, isn't it? Especially for your Consumer Duty Board report, Kate. Here, when you're actually showing a story, and demonstrating a story, and it's show and tell, isn't it? Hand in hand, show and tell. Are you seeing that board reports in July are better than they were when they were first produced a year and a half ago?
Yeah, I've definitely seen a maturity across the industry. I still see some absolute treats, but I think there is generally a concerted effort to get things right, and that's what the regulator's really asking you to do: is try your best to get it right. And I think the other thing, just with that kind of show and tell on Consumer Duty, is it's not easy because we're principle based here. And you have got, as an opportunity, firms to be a bit bold, to challenge some of that broader regulator thinking, utilise it, and do challenge them. I think that's absolutely fine, but make sure you've got the evidence to back it up. That's where the data's telling story is really helpful, because you can change the dynamic, you can change the offering, you can give customers something that they weren't expecting before. There's some really amazing opportunities for innovation with Consumer Duty because you're not tied to granular level rules.
You're nodding your head,
Yeah,
Adrian.
I think Kate and I are on the same page with regard to the regulator. Doesn't say you have to be perfect.
Mm,
Yeah.
Nowhere does it say you have to be perfect. In fact, if I saw a firm that was perfect, yeah, I'll go investigate them because they're clearly not.
yeah.
So I think the issue is about having about having credible data
Mm,
sources. Yeah. And for example, something in our world, when you offer up pass rate data as a credible evidence source, I think you have to expect the regulator to dig deeper. If, on
mm,
the other hand, you can say we continually monitor, measure, and rectify the competence, the in-role competence of our employees relative to the Act and Consumer Duty in particular, and here's the evidence, and there's 3 million data points, I suspect the regulator can take a step back. Firstly, they've got to analyse it. And it's really, really credible data. But you've got to have credible data if you're going to go back. And Kate, you're so right. I think the opportunity with principle-based regulation is that you can challenge it
mm.
if you've got a basis of credible challenge, evidence.
Picture paints or words, 1,000 words paints a picture on this one. We've looked at it, Helen, at the drivers and the triggers of Section 166 actions, and you introduce us to 165. But talk us through what's driving these issues and these challenges that firms and FCAs clearly see across all areas of our sector.
Yeah, so I mean, most requirement notices that we see from a financial crime point of view are actually really broad across the financial crime framework. But they've obviously, the starting point of them has obviously been different. But generally, by the time you get a Section 166, the FCA wants the skilled person to look at your entire financial crime framework. So, in my view, and I've said this a little bit already, the biggest driver is how firms respond when the FCA starts asking questions. So, before a 166, you don't just get a 166, you've had plenty of touch points with the FCA before you get there. And often those questions or touch points have been responded to really badly. So either they've been rushed or they've been too high level, or the firm can't support what they're saying with any evidence. And so if you respond weakly to a request from the FCA, then that's just going to make the FCA more concerned than they were when they first asked the question. If they're seeing sort of inconsistencies or MI that doesn't back up what the firm is saying, that's what's going to push the FCA towards a 166. I've also seen a couple of 166s that really I feel could have been avoided, and the FCA have decided to go to 166 rather than trying to do it outside of that, just because of frankly, the CEO or the MLRO has just been rude and hasn't dealt very well with their supervisor and could have dealt with it in a different way. And as
Sorry,
I've
did you
said,
say that rude?
rude. Yeah, I mean, literally, we've done one where the CEO of the firm just said that why were the FCA bothering him? He'd been in business for a really long time, and he couldn't understand why they were asking him any questions, and unsurprisingly, that didn't go very well.
What, that
But
culture point?
yeah, exactly. So there was, and you won't be surprised to know that culture was quite a big part of the requirement notice on that one.
No
But
There's
shit.
a book called How to Win Friends and Influence People.
exactly, it was not it was not a winning entry. But as I said already, we did 4 166s last year that all stemmed from 165s, and a couple of them were quite badly responded to. So I think the common weakness, the answer is it depends. It can be, for the starting point can be different. But I think the key piece is where you can't evidence the controls when you're challenged, then that's a problem. But as I said right at the start, the FCA tends to, when they do give you a Section 166 on financial crime, it does tend to be across your entire framework, even if they were concerned initially about governance or about due diligence, you will tend to get a section 166 that covers everything.
So for us lay people here, what is a section 166 or a skilled person test there? So firms can be on the front foot of that. And by the way, Kate, you've got a couple of questions, I think, in the Q&As is there for you to pick up on there. So Helen, sorry, please continue.
Well, it really tests whatever the FCA asks you to test, but it's probably worth, I think Kate and I do these all the time, so we kind of assume that everyone knows how they work, but I'm not sure they do. So I'm happy to go through it for a couple of minutes. So normally, as I say, you will have had a number of touch points, meetings, letters from the FCA. You don't just get a 166 out of the blue. You will know that the FCA has concerns. But what will happen is you'll get a letter called a draft requirement notice, and that draft requirement notice will tell you that you are subject to a skilled person review, and it will tell you the scope of that skilled person review, and they vary depending on what the FCA's concerns are. Normally, they will allow the firm who's subject to the skilled person review to select their own skilled person. So you'll get a period of maybe 3 weeks to get 3 quotes from potential firms that can do the skilled person review and submit those to the FCA by a certain deadline in order of preference for the FCA to approve your choice of skilled person. In certain circumstances where the FCA really doesn't have confidence in the firm, the FCA will make that appointment on the firm's behalf. And then once the FCA has approved that skilled person, then the work commences. So broadly, that's how it works. What have I missed, Kate? I'm sure I've missed things there.
No, I think that's clear. I think ultimately nobody wants or asks for a 166. They are costly, they are timely, they take away from BAU, and they are intrusive, really. With a 166 to get there, there has to be a concern. In my career, I have been skilled person, oh gosh, for lots and lots, over 40 skilled person reviews. Never, with the exception of one firm that I investigated, were the FCA's concerns unfounded. There is usually some element in truth in what they have asked you to investigate. With the exception of one firm that I did look at who were absolutely outstanding and just hadn't communicated it very well to the FCA in the first place. So I think, make sure that the ultimate ask on firms is to avoid getting there in the first place.
Yeah.
Are the FCA using the tools differently? Have we seen a shift in what FCA are doing with Sheldon stepping down and Matt Brewis leaving? I don't think those individuals in themselves create a shift. I think what is driving a shift from FCA at the moment is kind of going back to the start, that kind of pressure from Treasury, growth agenda. And I think they've got to have a really credible case right now to move to 166. I think the danger is for firms, it means that it'll happen quicker. And when it does happen, it's more intrusive than ever. Because they've got really good, strong reasons for it.
Yeah. The other thing I guess I would add is that most of the firms we do skilled person reviews for, they haven't intended to get there. They might have a weak control, but it's not because they wanted that to happen. They've just missed something, or so generally we have pretty collaborative relationships with the firms that we are skilled person for. There have been 1 or 2 exceptions to that in my career, but most firms didn't want to get it wrong in the first place. There's just something has happened with their procedures or the controls that has led them to that situation. But a lot of firms, most firms, I would say, that end up in a skilled person situation try and use it as a learning experience to get better. And there are a couple of exceptions, but that's how most firms deal with it in my experience.
So you can get on the front foot, as we talked about, Adrian, by following what Kate and Helen said, even before Section 166 or a skilled person review is requested by the FCA there. From a people point of view, how do we make that happen?
Mindset shift. You move away from single point in time, frankly, cosmetic assessment of people's competence, and you move to continual assessment regime, which is collaborative, gentle, supportive of the employee, supportive of line management, yeah, and provides you with concrete evidence to support your claim that you are genuinely operating to the spirit of the legislation. And I think that's a very, very strong stance to rebuff any 165. And I suspect, given that people competence issues relate to at least 50% of whatever it is of the successful 166s, that's a really good place to start in terms of rebuffing that 165. So it's a mindset, just move away from ticking boxes and, dare I say, get with the program, help your people and help yourself by doing it on a continual assessment basis, bit like your photocopiers.
How quickly is it possible for firms to turn that competency data that you would get from taking that approach to genuine regulatory assurance?
Given that the firm in question has no obligation to be perfect, straight away. Because there has been a mindset shift in that enterprise, hasn't there? In order for them to say, we are now moving from a single point in time assessment regime to a place where, we're just shifting. We're going to help our people and we're going to collect this data. Okay, we've only got a little bit at the moment, but we're going to have a whole lot more in 3 months' time. For me, that's a perfectly credible answer to Kate's earlier point. The regulator doesn't say you've got to be perfect. Talk about the story. Helen's point. Story tell the data. Where are we going? Are we moving forward and can we substantiate it? Of course, the downside is you actually got to bloody do it, because they'll write it down and they'll come back and say, you said. So,
I got the opportunity of actually talking to one of your clients, and they were looking forward to the regulator coming round, because they wanted to showcase their employee competence.
I know that customer. She's brilliant. Yeah.
And I thought that is a great mindset to have there. And on the screen, I know that we don't want a product push. It's not. We don't think it's appropriate on that. But a few of your delighted clients and customers, Adrian.
Yeah, I'm not going to product push, because I noticed when we reviewed the slides in a very professional way 2 minutes before we started the webinar, there was a blatant product push slipped in by our marketing team. So I'll just leave that. People on the webinar can read that. We've got plenty of these case studies, and if you're interested, just contact us.
We looked at employee competence alongside other data enhancements, not cosmetic data enhancements, but opportunities to actually look at how not only where your people's competence are, but where it could be there. I think that many firms are getting that memo, Adrian. I really do. I think that it's landing much more than it was 3, 4, 5 years ago.
Yeah, and I tell you what, I think, I don't know who it was. I'm going to credit the regulator with this tick box approach to compliance, and it's landed. We hear it a lot, and to be honest, what we hear perhaps more is compliance professionals bemoaning the resources that they need to do this properly. And that for me, that's a cultural red flag. We want to do this. What we're doing is ticking boxes, I know, but can't get the C-suite on side. And there's that blatant product pitch from our marketing team. So my apologies. We do have another webinar. If you're interested in this new product, which is, I've got to say, game changing, get on the webinar. It maxes out with 1,000 people, like all our webinars. So first come, first served. And you get a copy of the slides.
Yeah, and you get a copy of the slide. Let's bring it into land now, Kate and Helen. There, we've got opportunities here for firms to really get on the front foot in 2026 and actually start moving the dial in terms of like what they can offer, what they can do, what can they show the regulator. Where do they start with this? It's very, sometimes, lots of heads of compliance, lots of heads of risk here, have an inbox full of requests and petitions of what are priorities. How do you help firms start on that journey? Imagine they're at base camp. How do they get to Everest, if that's ever possible?
I think we work with lots of clients on that basis, and I think it's about proportionality working out what is important and when it is important. I feel for firms because I think there's a huge volume of information from the regulator that if you're just sat there in a compliance department, it's very difficult to keep pace with expectations. On our website, you'll see we've got a free gap analysis tool. It's brilliant. It's really helpful for firms in terms of working out if you think you've got an issue or if there has been a fine, just measuring yourself against what FCA is saying outside of the rule book, against their speeches, against their fines. That's the best tool that you can use from that perspective. So
yeah, and being really honest with yourself, I think, as well, when you use them, not just saying, yep, everything's fine, just really challenging yourself.
And then when you do see something that's shit, excuse my French, address it. Don't just sweep it under the carpet, right? Which act on the data when you do see it, when you do see it, which was, I think, Helen's point. That says a lot of firms see the data and then don't act on it.
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and with those gap analysis templates, we always make the questions so that we make them open questions so that people can't just say yes. We really challenge people to, to answer these things honestly and to really think about the answer.
Yeah.
You've got a number of opportunities that you can take your interest in if you want to reach out to Avyse Partners for anything around financial crime frameworks and controls, or just assessing your approach to consumer duty. Please tick the first box there, and opportunities to talk to Kate and Helen in a bit more details. If you want to reach out to Elephants, don't forget to actually get that measurable MI on your people, which is critical as well. And, politicians can swear in the House of Commons, so it's okay, Adrian. You can swear on your own webinar as well there. Also, you have the opportunity to access papers, blogs, and podcasts and webinars from both organisations there. A few questions here that were just sent to us as well, but we'll take those offline, given that we're up against time there. So thank you very much indeed. I think the critical thing, as I said to you at the start of the webinar, was looking at creditable data and evidence. Easy. I haven't finished yet. I was going to segue into closing this down. And creditable evidence on your controls and your I've lost my train of thought now. Controls and conduct, as well as your competence. That was it. Controls, competence, and culture there. Right. That's it. Now you can applaud. Now you can high five. Now you can do all that sort of stuff as well. And remember, get that air fryer. I recommend the Ninja.
Quick. Black Friday.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.
Take care, everyone. Cheers.
Bye.
Good job.